You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Alex G, and I want to welcome you to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Hey, it's the post-Oscar season. I love to have discussions about Oscars before the awards or the leading movies, but there's been so much hoopla around Best Picture, Green Book, that I thought, you know what, let me go and watch it. I've been meaning to get to the theaters to see it, but let me watch it to find out what the hoopla is all about. And what I thought is that I would drop this episode to give not a general black perspective of the movie, because there's no black monolith, but at least this black man's perspective on Green Book, on why I think that there's controversy around it, and things that I found problematic about the movie, and things that I thought were good and nicely handled. My friend Eli is going to be in the studio with me today because we both watched it separately, but wanted to talk about how he is a white male, what his take may have been on it, and what mine was. And so I'm sure you're going to find this very, very insightful. And I'm sure that you're trying to figure out why it's such, why there's so much controversy around it. I'll start off by saying, Eli, that I enjoyed watching it. It's a 2-hour movie. I can see why people were having problems with it, but I also understand why folks want to watch a movie that in 2 hours will have blacks and whites totally ignoring history and becoming best friends in the midst of a very turbulent and divisive world. And why we'd want that done on screen during such a polarizing time in our country. So I think I'll just start from there. I can see why people, not black folks, but I could see why some white folks would really enjoy this, because they want to say, see, it can work. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And I think that would be definitely something the Academy would want to feel good about promoting, because they have had trouble in the last couple of years, with Oscars so white, and it seemed like a lot of the presenters this year, they seem to make a stance on having a wide representation of race. But I think we can get to this, but it was probably the safest film to kind of portray that this year, with all the pictures made by people of color.
Sure. I mean, when I think about BlackKklansman, now that was up for Best Picture too, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And then if Beale Street Could Talk, I don't know if that, it won Best Actress, but I don't know if that
I don't think it was up for Best Picture.
It wasn't up for Best Picture. Black Panther, and then Green Book.
Yeah.
And, Black Panther, of course, hands down, made more money than any of them. It sort of had sort of this Afrofuturist sort of take on the world. With BlackKklansman, I saw that with 3 other black friends in Florida. Yeah. We're just kind of hanging out together. And I admit it's a different experience than had I been with some of my white colleagues, because I could feel where we were all getting tense at the same moment, hey, say that again. That's right.
Right.
But infiltrating a system as ugly as the KKK and working to bring it down, we want to see something as subversive as that, because that had to have been what many black folks thinking about during that time. But when I looked at Green Book, I just thought, okay, now I get why people are pissed, because it didn't wrestle with some of the true issues of the day that made these men come from such different worlds. And so I understood Spike Lee's frustration. Yeah. And just thinking, come on, really? We're going to have like a reversal of, Driving Miss Daisy? Like, do we have to just keep, having, driving scenes for someone to really, do people really build relationships over the armrest or the back seat or the headrest? So I can see some of the frustration. So I think I want to start that in that regard, it was too simplistic, and I think it just makes a false case that all you got to do is just spend a couple of months driving together, a couple of weeks, and then, you won't see race, you won't see color, and this is what America needs: more white people driving black people around.
For sure. I remember seeing the trailer for this film before it came out, and I felt like I could kind of get all of the messages just from the trailer, all the emotional, dramatic beats that they were going to go through. Like you said, just kind of these moments of spending time with each other and experience things from each other's world would change them, which certainly has its merits and happens, but I don't think that's a new message by any means that we've gotten from Hollywood films.
Right. Let me just start in with one of the opening scenes where there were 2 black servicemen who came in to fix lights, electricity, or electrical outlets or something in Tony Lip's family in his home. And his wife was very kind to them, but I could tell by the way the camera zeroed in on the black men drinking. Yeah. I knew right then, okay, these glasses are going in the garbage. I knew that. So he sort of vacillated. He went and he looked at it. He threw them away. His wife later took them back out and put them in the sink. So that told us right there that he was a racist, that he was having trouble, that it was all right for those black men to come in and serve him and fix his house, but they couldn't put their black lips on their glasses. But what I think the film didn't do was to contextualize it. Where did that come from? Because, in a lot of places, the Italians were despised as well. Right. And so what happened? Like, where did that start for him? Because to go from that to accepting a driving job and then protecting this guy and putting your life on the line was just too much of a jump.
I totally agree. I mean, I don't think the character development was there, even from when he first meets
Dr. Don Shirley.
Yeah, Don Shirley. We don't really see that transition in his character. He seems pretty okay with it at that point. Right. And I think we would have, if that's what he's established as, his relationship to black people, I don't think we see the change.
Right, right. And so I think that was really problematic for the folks. Of course, later on we'll get into what some of Dr. Shirley's family thought. Yeah. But I think you're right. There's a scene where where Tony meets Don Shirley. First of all, I love that exalted seated role.
Yeah, that's right.
I was like, okay, he's like, why is he sitting on this throne? But he's kind of looking down at him. That was, I know that was real intentional, and I'm sure Nick, who is Tony's son, probably saw a room that looked like that. Now, that might have been as much of a I don't want to say prop, but like something he brought back, or something he brought back, just like the elephant tusk or some of the other things. I don't know that he really sat there to transact business with potential drivers, because I think he was a little bit more, he had a little bit more couth than that. But I still love that scene, how he's sitting looking at this guy sitting on this throne. Yeah. But Tony had a problem when it seemed like he was sort of okay with the driving, but he said, hey, I'm not a butler. If you want someone to shine shoes and press clothes, you get someone else to do that, but I can get you from point A to point B, because, you in the South is going to have a problem. And I think they set us up to think that he didn't want to do that because Don Shirley was black. And then it sort of couched it in, where he's sort of this macho guy that's not going to iron somebody else's boxers and help this guy get dressed. Yeah, I think that those are places where they sort of hinted that the problem might have been that, but then they sort of redeemed Tony by saying, no, he just doesn't want to be a butler.
Yeah, he's not going to press his own pants. I think
they made a point. They made a point of that. But come on, this is 1962. I don't care who you are. Men probably aren't going to iron each other's clothes anyway. That's why I think, I grew up, in the 60s and 70s, so I watched shows like Family Affair, where Sebastian Cabot played Mr. French, and he was a gentleman's gentleman, but he brought some esteem to it. So he had confidence, and so he could, do that for the Brian Keith character. But this is a little bit different. And so that stood out to me, that they were already showing us that maybe he being Tony, had picked up some of these views by growing up, but it wasn't really personal. It's just sort of, I just don't want. I don't want to be your butler, but I'll be your bodyguard. And I think another thing that's a major theme that I'm hearing as a criticism is just the fact that while they're driving, it is Tony, who clearly does not like black people, is introducing Dr. Shirley to black music. Like, hey, who's that player? I don't care who you are. If Tony knew who Little Richard was, then Shirley had to, and he's a musician. Right. Even if you say this is not what I want to do, or this is sort of a style, I don't want to put my, Cuddy Shark, I don't want to put my alcohol on the piano and play. Yeah. You don't know who Little Richard is on the radio? Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of those things seemed mostly for dramatic effect or as plot devices, to see that they were both receiving things from each other. Right. That they were sort of getting cultural lessons on each other, where then Don Shirley gets introduced to fried chicken. Right. These sort of extremes.
Exactly.
I don't know all the true story, but I imagine they were not extreme differences in that way.
Sure. I had a conversation recently with a colleague who is from Trinidad, and she said, the way we were raised is different than how people are raised in America. So some of these insights about black-white race relations are sort of a foreign concept. So when we have the family talk with the white folks from our church about race relations. Can I sit in on it? So that's very interesting. So there are two stories. One is that Shirley is born in Florida. Others state that he was born somewhere in Jamaica, that he was Jamaican born. But his parents clearly were Jamaican. So there may have been aspects of American culture that he was not familiar with. But if he was raised in the U.S. in the 40s and the 50s, he certainly knew about this. And even if his folks were from Jamaica, they knew jerk chicken. Fried chicken would not have been a stretch. And the fact that he had never had it, that no one in his family or cousins or relatives had ever fried chicken in this man's presence in the South. Come on, give me a break.
Yeah. Seemed like a stretch for sure.
Right. And even if you hadn't, was he really going to divulge that to his white driver, to his new white driver?
Right.
To look as if he was somehow mystified by black culture. You know, the phrase that Tony used in one of the scenes where he said, I'm blacker than you. I've heard more than one white person say that to me, say that to my daughter, say that to others. As if that's a badge of honor, that people want the coolness of black. Right. And not to even mention collagen in your lips and your nose and your butt to look black, but don't want the pressure of really being black. And so he was completely fine with Shirley staying in subpar hotels. But when the guy said, "Oh, you're Italian. Oh, no wonder you're being so nice to him because you're half N-word yourself." That's when he said, "Oh no, you crossed the line. You can talk about him because he is that. Yeah. But don't call me that because I'm above that." And we have to somehow explain why people in the Mediterranean and Italian, why they're so dark. Right. My mother used to say growing up, that little body of water between Italy and Africa is not that far. That's why Italians are so dark. So there's just sort of this thought, this idea that that's what happened. But that he would explain, that Tony would have understanding of the degrees of blackness. That by understanding chicken and music, he was blacker than this man who had lived in black skin his entire life. That part pissed me off.
Do you think, from your perspective, I'm curious, incidents like that, do you see that message sort of catering to the white audience to make them sort of feel better? Like, see, we're also have prejudice against white people, or we have experiences that are comparable, even though he's called out on it in the film.
Sure.
Do you think the filmmakers were trying to make a point about digging into people's racism and pulling that out through that, or was it kind of to make white people feel better?
Probably make white people feel better. I think the idea of pulling out that racism was an inadvertent benefit. Yeah. Because I don't think that they were astute enough. And I like the Farrelly brothers. I like stuff that they've done. But I think in this project, they wanted to tell a story from a certain perspective. And I think they wanted to simplify it. And what that really does is it sets white people up to think, okay, all I got to do is be in the same space. Yeah. And then we can be a model that the whole world is, just effed up, jacked up. And if we can just make sure that we play together, that we're cool, then that's all that matters. But it doesn't take into account the systemic realities that makes this possible. So I'll hear from parents who are telling me that they're so proud that their children are in multicultural activities. But if you're a white parent and you don't have any black colleagues who are in your same socioeconomic class or grouping, I think that's very, very important because your perspective of cross-cultural relationships cannot just be about handing out sandwiches or backpacks. You can't just say, I know culture in black people, why I serve lunch once a week. And so they want their kids to do it, but they don't know where to go to actually model that for the kids and have those cross-cultural relationships. I think that's part of what's happening. And so I think that the movie does a disservice because it pisses black people off. And then it makes white people say, well, I've got a wife, I've got a black friend, I've got someone that I've known, and so there's no racism because it doesn't stop us, and I don't see color. I'm glad they didn't let Tony see that, but I think that was like the next. They did message, everything but let Tony say, hey, I don't even see color.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we could make a comparison to BlackKklansman and what's that sort of saying about race, and Green Book, because I do feel like Green Book doesn't go very far in changing the sort of race relations we've seen in film for a long time.
Sure.
And one thing I noticed is going to film school, they always show Birth of a Nation as a film to admire for its technical craft, its innovations, and how it showed things.
But that's indoctrination.
But there's never questions about race or conversation around that.
Are you serious?
Yep. And certainly, I'm not talking for every professor, but
Sure.
that's what I've heard from other filmmakers when they go through school. And so I liked that contrast, that juxtaposition in BlackKklansman of we're seeing, the Klansmen watch it, and then we're hearing this speech to this black student group that's contrasting with that message, and that's a powerful contrast.
Sure,
I think, for sure.
So it's interesting. I have heard that in the film industry, Birth of a Nation is considered like the first great American film.
Yep.
But I just got to ask. So they show it for its technical prowess. It's
it did have innovations, in editing and cross-cutting and things like that. Yeah.
But it didn't contextualize the fact that this was Reconstruction right after the abolition of slavery, and that 16 black men were in Congress, and this was actually propaganda.
It was propaganda, yeah.
To say, do you really want these barbarians? Do you really want these? Do you want these folks representing you, in Congress?
Yeah.
And so even though people are being trained in film subliminally, they're getting this message. And these are folks who are going on to tell future stories that use this as a foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important in our media to consider, there's also been admiration for, Leni Riefenstahl's films, Nazi propaganda in the technical side of it and what they were doing.
Wow.
But that's the same thing. Like I'm not going to say I hated Green Book or anything,
right.
But there's something to think about how well something is made and the message that it's conveying.
Right.
In doing that. So yeah, we can say those were innovative, very effective films, but what is the message that they were trying to get across? Like you said, is propaganda.
Right, right. Because I think if you had a black film instructor, they would never show something as hideous as A Birth of a Nation, or let's just say any other topic. They would not take something that completely exploited black people and say, but you know what? It had great sound engineering, or this had great costumes. So let's watch it, even though this sucks, and this helps to create or to perpetuate another generation of having these false beliefs that this is so systemic, because here's where people are cutting their teeth on film in order to enter into this whole world. You couldn't pay black folks to do that. Yeah. And so the fact that you could use something that has been so destructive for its technical ability, while knowing you have to sort of breathe and digest the theme, is crazy. That in itself is part of a racist system. And so, you look at things like that and you wonder, why can't we get films to tell the whole story? Yeah. And again, you're not saying every film school did that. Right. But that professor learned it somewhere, and it's still being shown. Yeah. It's not being called a great American film by the American Dental Association. That's being held by folks who make film. And man, that's making my blood boil right now. What was your take about the sharecropper scenes? When they stopped on the side of the road, and then Shirley was looking at the folks, who were working. Again, he lived in Florida, he lived in America. That couldn't have been a new scene or new sight for him. Right. But I didn't necessarily pick up that it was so new, but that it was painful. He's been driven by this white guy, and he's watching people working out in the field. It looked just like a scene from a slave plantation or from Roots or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the better scenes. And they didn't, at least compared to other moments, they didn't, there was no conversation about it, no talking. Right. So I think in some ways, handling scenes that way better to kind of just give you the contrast and let the audience think about what's going on there, instead of trying to explain it or glaze over it, was pretty good. I don't know if the Tony character really noticed what was happening, and maybe that was intentional. Right, he didn't say anything about it, or didn't really even look at it. I don't think he really paid attention to what was aware of that. Yeah, I mean, taking aside, what I've heard is the inaccuracies in the Don Shirley portrayal, that he's so disconnected from African American
right, because his family completely refutes that.
Yeah, right. So, but it was an interesting contrast to see that. But again, I don't know if that's the story that needs to be told, that contrast needs to be told. Yeah.
I think one of the things that white filmmakers about the black story need to really do is, one, just have lots and lots and lots of consultation. And I know they had Octavia Spencer as a part of their team as a director or someone, because she actually, as I watched the extra scenes, she was actually interviewed, and she was on the stage when they won Best Picture. I didn't know why she was up there because I hadn't seen the movie yet. I thought she was an actress in it. No, she had quite a bit of space. Now on the credits, when you pull it up on iTunes, it does not mention her name.
Oh, interesting.
But on the extras, they actually talked to her for about 5 minutes about the importance of this message.
Yeah.
Do you think they did a good job? Again, watching this as a white male, do you think they did a good job of explaining why Shirley wanted to go through the South? I mean, it was sort of brought up here and there, but I'm wondering, do you think that point was brought home as to why he wanted to go through the South?
I don't think it was very clear. And maybe they wanted to leave a little bit open. I know when they were sitting down for dinner, and I think it was the Russian member of his trio, that he kind of tried to explain it, and I think they wanted it to be a big moment, big revelation, but I don't think it quite came across that way.
Is that the scene where the line came out? He said something like, "Genius is not enough; it takes courage to change people's hearts."
I think so. Yeah.
Which is a powerful statement.
Yeah.
But I think somehow that was lost in. In translation. I mean, the heart that he really changed was Tony's, and maybe they're just saying change it one person at a time, one driver at a time, and you do have to focus on the individual. But I guess what I don't understand is why Shirley's genius didn't really affect the other two members of his trio.
Yeah.
Because even in the last scene where they were eating in that restaurant, that supper club where they were going to play, they sat there. They could clearly look at the maitre d' to find out what was going on. But they kept sitting there at their salad. Didn't really speak up. And again, they're part of the record deal. So I'm not saying that they're personal friends.
Right.
But it's very interesting that they never really spoke up other than to come and get Tony. Hey, Shirley's drunk in a bar and he's being beaten up. They were very lackadaisical in their response to what was going on. So they could identify what was happening and Shirley what he was trying to change. But it's very interesting. They're in his trio. I don't see where they were changed.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I think they overemphasize this sort of disconnect from African American culture for Don Shirley in his characterization. And then we kind of get this little hints that, he's doing this to help bring awareness and change culture by going into these different spheres of white people. So I think why didn't they lean on that instead of it becomes a message of the white person educating him on his culture instead of the other way around.
And I got to be honest, Eli, that's the part that really pisses me off because part of my work through the Justified Anger Initiative of Nehemiah is, for the past 20, 30 years, I've been working to build capacity, my team has, in African Americans. And we've done that with a significant degree of success. Yeah. But I understand that if you're going to really bring about systemic change, you have to work with those who are empowered by systems and who benefit from systems. And so you got to do both and. You got to build capacity in African Americans to understand how to navigate, to affirm the strength, the beauty, the dignity of our culture. And we do that. But as I move into the work, the part of my work that allows me to delve into white systems and system leaders, have those kinds of conversations, there's some real pushback, like, why are you in such a hurry? Why can't you be more like this person? Yeah. Or they're telling me how to bring about the change, how to do it programmatically. So as a person who respects the call, the balls it takes to really infiltrate these systems, I felt like the Farrelly brothers, Tony's son Nick, should have really brought out the fact that it was to be genius and courageous are two big things. Yeah. But I feel like they didn't explain that what Shirley was doing was so significant, or as significant as it was, and it was broader than just bringing Tony into the light, or and you said this, of Tony bringing him into the light, to be gutsy enough to stand up to these folks. I think there was one place where they said, "How does he keep shaking their hands?" Yeah. And it makes it sound almost as if he was trying to make white people like him, or he felt more comfortable or akin to white people, and completely downplaying the fact that if you're going to really change systemic racism, you can't just tell black people to suck it up. You got to tell white folks to stand down, and you're wrong. And Shirley, Shirley's character attempted to do that with the bathroom scene.
Yeah.
And he had to drive back to his own place to go to the bathroom. I think that would have been a place to have walked out. I think that would have been a place to just say screw you, and to do what he's doing. But then to go and do this, relieve himself, and then come back, that caused some frustration for me. Although that's a real cost of being a cross-cultural social innovator. Because sometimes you have to choose your battles. Is this what I want to do? But then I think it's easy to get lost in this. So you want to change white minds, but you want to go back to your black bathroom. He wants you to go to the outhouse like you're a slave or a sharecropper. How much impact are you really having? Yeah,
that's tough.
Another scene that a couple of things, when they were in jail, he said, Tony, you can't resort to violence because dignity always prevails, and you can't use violence. And I think that was sort of a knock at some of the uprisings that came in response to some of the oppression. I think, and this will come as a shock to many of our white listeners, we now talk about the Black Panthers as if they were the black equivalent to neo-Nazis. And they started off doing after-school programs and before-school programs like Nehemiah does. Food programs, mentoring programs, tutoring programs, getting kids home safely. It was when police officers refused to protect black women and they were being assaulted that they started taking up arms to protect their own communities. That background is not told when you hear Black Panther. It is intended that you feel the same sense of fear and consternation that you would when you talk about what David Duke's character, BlackKklansman. It's supposed to spark that same kind of fear, and that's not really what was intended. That if we had been protected, they would have never moved to that next that whole next level. So the idea that dignity always prevails. It depends on how you define dignity, but sometimes you do have to boycott, you do have to picket, you do have to march. You do have to take up arms to protect yourself. You don't go and just start shooting up folks. But there comes a time where if you are afraid for your life, I mean, Florida has this, stand your ground. We have these rules where if you feel threatened, you can protect yourself. That's what Black Panthers were doing, but they're written off as black extremists who have been radicalized by some group to be anti-white and anti-American, and were put in the same category as communists. And so I feel like that line, that dignity always prevails, was conflictual, particularly since he makes his one phone call. We find out it's to Bobby Kennedy. So I'm cheering, I'm high-fiving myself, my wife, as we're watching it. But then he's in the backseat of the car saying, oh, damn, now what is Bobby Kennedy going to think about me? If Bobby Kennedy calls the governor, who then calls this precinct, he must have thought that was fairly egregious. So now defending yourself is something that you're embarrassed about. Why can't we celebrate the fact that you are a black virtuoso who used his dime to call the attorney general, the brother to JFK? Why can't we celebrate that connection? But the flip of it is, I'm about to talk out of both sides of my face. There are times where I know who to call to get something done, but I've got to admit, as angry as I am that he couldn't celebrate that, I think I give myself a little bit more room to celebrate it. When I do celebrate it, there are times I've asked myself, why must I always advocate for myself? Or why must I always remind someone that this is not the case? Why do I need someone else to do it? Can't I take care of myself? I mean, we talked about a situation recently, both of us experienced or witnessed, where someone dropped the N-word to describe someone because that was sort of their moniker. And I argued it wasn't, and we went back and forth. And one of our mutual acquaintances actually spoke to the person. But I have to admit, later that day, I celebrated, hey, one of my white allies shut that shit down. But there was a part of me that thought, but you know what? I should just do that on my own. I shouldn't have to have a younger staff member have to address that. But then on the other hand, I don't have enough time and energy to address all of that.
You have to do that
because,
all the time,
because it's going back and forth. Well, what about rap music? Well, that's what they called him in this part of the country. That's what was on his gravestone, and we go back and forth on it. And and I experienced that going into another meeting where I needed to be present for work that I had to do. So I've got some conflict on that scene, but it could be because I can relate to it, that you have access. And I think, you know me, I'm a verbal processor.
Yeah.
I think the fact that he was connected enough to reach one of the highest persons in the highest position in the country, which means he knew who he was.
Yeah.
But to get him out of a prison out of a jail cell where he did nothing wrong,
Right.
it was Tony that punched out the other officer.
Yep.
And he's making this man get out in the rain because you driving him. This is a sundown town. And so he's got this angst where he can hang with the attorney general, but an uneducated, backwards sheriff deputy can control his life in that moment.
Right.
Knowing who you are is a very dangerous thing. And I don't think the movie did a good job of explaining the irony of that juxtaposition of what it means to be who he was and what it means to be who many strong, outspoken, and successful black figures are. That on one day you're hanging with the governors and the mayors and the county executives and CEOs, and the other days you got your hands on 10 and 2 because the police want to know who you are and what are you doing in this church parking lot on a Saturday night at 9:00. That juxtaposition, the irony of it, is very, very real. And that was a long response. But I needed to get that out. But I'm curious what you thought about that particular scene. If you've given any thought to what he was saying, or even what he might have been experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think it kind of fit with the way they portrayed it in the film. He was trying to teach Tony a lesson about, dignity and standing up for, who you are and who you should be. But it did seem a little flat. And we do see instances where there's violence against Don in the film.
Right.
So there is consequences. But I think, like you're saying, in reality, yes, dignity is important, but it doesn't always turn out into a nice, holiday meal, racially integrated holiday meal at the end of the movie. It did make me think more of, and certainly I don't think I catch all the nuances of it, but Spike Lee makes much more complicated films. And I think if we have the black filmmakers making these stories, going back to Do the Right Thing, I think I still struggle with the ending of that movie. And he kind of compares, Martin Luther King's agenda and how he does things with Malcolm X.
Right.
And I don't think he gives you good answers on what to do. And I think the same thing with BlackKklansman. He can't avoid making the comparisons to what's happening now. We get the Charlottesville footage at the very end, and I think he calls forward that complexity and nuance to, that violence is involved in these situations sometimes. And there's horrible consequences for people of color in these situations, even if they're standing up for their dignity.
Right. I think this is a Western thing. It's not just white American, but perhaps a Western thing, and perhaps it's also very male. We like closure with a very nice bow on it. And so you're right. Spike Lee leaves things open-ended. Recently, I did a tag team series with a white associate, young white associate gentleman I'm mentoring at a church, and we were talking about just the problem of white supremacy and how it shaped Christianity in America. And we were talking through it, and we knew there was going to be a 2-part series. And he said to me, I feel like I want to give some of the white people hope. And I said, I get where you're going, but the second part is only a week away. It's not like they've got to wait until next year.
Right, yeah.
But this sense to cause ease, because it's never closed for black people. That's another thing that came out of the story, that you can live on top of Carnegie Hall, but thrown into a jail.
Yeah.
And there's actually one point where he says, I'm not, Tony, I'm not black enough for one group. I'm not white enough for another group. Who am I then? Who am I? I'm not strong enough or man enough. Then who am I? But we live with the complexity of open-endedness, that success on a stage or a film. We learned this with the Milwaukee Bucks player who was also arrested and on camera taken down, or my being pulled over by the police and asked what I was doing at our church when my white associate who was there before me was not asked that question, was allowed to get out of his car and ask questions about the interrogation. That you never know when it's going to flip, that you can have a very, very high moment. In the Jackie Robinson story is this great athletic figure who's somewhat co-opted for some political propaganda, but he's going to an award ceremony but can't come in the same door. and says, okay, it's all right. I'll just walk around and go through the kitchen. That you can be stopped for your autograph, but you can't walk through the same doors of the people who have bought a ticket to come and honor you. That's the complexity of being black in America. And unless people really feel it, we can't rush them to a real feel good solution.
Right.
Because you just can't do that. It takes a while. And I don't think we want to wait for that period of time. We want good closure. And so when people like Spike Lee leaves things open-ended, it really frustrates people because we just want one example of where it works, so then we can ascribe that to the whole struggle. There's another piece that stood out to me in the last the Christmas program, the Christmas Eve program, where Shirley was not allowed to eat in that particular restaurant. Again, I'm mad at the other members of the trio who were sitting down, eating their food completely fine, working their privilege. Were they American? I'm trying to think. Because the one was speaking they were speaking languages together. So was one?
The one was speaking Russian for sure. They made a point to say that, and I think they might have even commented.
Because I wasn't sure if he studied it or just had learned it, but
they didn't really say how long he'd been in America.
Right, and so that could be that they, that even though you're foreign, you're not from America, you can experience some benefits.
Yeah.
Particularly, this is in the 60s, and someone who speaks Russian, who could very well be Russian. When you consider the Cold War threats, that someone who's considered a natural enemy is more accepted than someone who's been in this country for years is wild. But the maitre d' or whoever the guy was, the GM kept saying, this is just a thing. This is the way things are. We don't make the rules. It's silly, but you do understand. You understand, right? That sort of nice approach to it's not me. I didn't make up the rules. Just somebody upstairs, Mr. Buchanan or whoever his name is on this thing. They really do it. But let's really stay in our places.
Yeah.
That's not just in that era. That's not germane to the South. That was happening and still happens in New York. And it happens in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
And we act as if these things are all gone, that he was just someone stuck in some crazy backwards era. But he speaks to so many folks. Hey, I don't make the rules.
Yeah.
Hey, we just have never gotten black teachers to apply here. We can't get more black women to apply for the police force. We can't find more professors. It's so freaking cold here.
Right.
And if we could hire them, Michigan could hire them more money. So we'd hire them and just to train them, and then Michigan would steal them. This is just the way things are. We didn't create it. So people get to benefit from it and they get to perpetuate it, but they never are held responsible for it. And he said, come on, we have 400 guests waiting. Like, don't hold up my thing for, your wanting to be right. So the fact that blacks can entertain, this is another piece I want to move, that we can entertain, but that does not mean that you're equals.
Yeah.
And so it's all right interacting with us when we are doing a soft shoe, when we're entertaining people, making them feel good. But when you're not allowed to use your voice to stand up for yourself, then you're the problem maker, which makes me think a lot about Kaepernick and the kneeling during the national anthem. The thought is, come on, you're making good money. You are definitely proof that there's no real racism in this country. You're not shot because you have done what the cops have said. So why are you the problem maker? Don Shirley was a problem maker. He was a hellraiser. He was the one that was not being reasonable. And then he's going to take the white guy, the freaking driver. Come here, get your guy together. How much money is it going to take? Obviously, you need money because you wouldn't be driving one of these, who around if you had any self-esteem or if you had any other options. You're obviously doing this because you can't do anything else. So let me speak down to you socioeconomic. Let me speak so that you can understand me in your broken, ignorant Italian accent. But that the whole thing that you're holding everything up, the pressure of, Alex, if you just stop being angry, why are you still angry? Like we've made strides. Come on, just admit it. Just look at Oprah, look at Michael Jordan, look at Michael Jackson, look at Spike Lee. We made it. You guys have made it. Like, come on, just get on stage. Come on, just sing "We Shall Overcome." Just congratulate the people that have made a huge difference. But yet, I'm still concerned that we can have a gubernatorial race and not talk about race hard enough when Wisconsin is being recognized. And I voted for the current governor, so I'm not downing him. But how is it that you can be called the most segregated state in the union and not really hit that hard and say, here's how we got here? How did we get through the mayoral primary without really hitting that hard? We talk about how we move ahead. We talk about the Kumbaya song, but who's acknowledging how we really got here? Because if no one names it, then no one's expected to break the systems. down. And so the fact that it is incumbent upon black people to have been shunned, broken, dispirited because of systemic racism, Jim Crow, deconstruction, then we've got to play nice. Like if we just stop speaking up, if we would just stop pissing in the punch bowl, then everybody would be happy.
Right.
And so that part still rings very, very, very true. And I want folks who are part of the Black Like Me podcast family who are listening, I want them to really think long and hard about this. One of the difficulties, Eli, of working on my genealogy project and it's been a major undertaking because I feel like I'm bringing honor to my great-great-grandfather Henderson when I do so. But when I was presenting at the Madison Club, at a downtown swank sort of business supper club, I'm a part of it. I'm on their board. But as I was talking, I'm always cautious because when I talk about the success of my family, I feel that people are going to say, well, Alex, see, you are living proof. You are the black poster boy.
Yeah.
Slavery did not hold people down. It only held down the people in the families where the men were not man enough to take care of their families, where they were too busy doing drugs. They were going in and out of jail. They wouldn't get a good education. They were tearing up the community. So when you talk about the success in spite of all that was happening in the world, you get pigeonholed as that guy who proved that there's no systemic problems. But when you speak out against the systemic problems, the response is, come on, you live in Fitchburg. You have a home you built. Right. You and your wife and your daughter and your mother and your sister and about 8 other cousins have degrees from a major university. Come on, shut up. You're angry now. Just be the good guy living in a suburb telling us how folks don't see color in your cul-de-sac, rather than understanding that I can be the beneficiary of strong black genes, of great faith, and a dynamic mother who raised the bar for me, and a community who gave me space, being Madison and our church or faith community, give me the space to grow into who I am. But at times, people want to give me a gag order, which says, if you just celebrate your success, come on, are you really justified in your anger about systemic realities? And I think that's the piece that I need our white podcast family members, people following Black Like Me, to understand that it's not either or, that those of us that have had the benefit of overcoming the barriers, the historic barriers, we now are encumbered with the responsibility of freeing others. I'm not making myself or others a Harriet Tubman, but she did not think that her liberty was an occasion to just live the good life in America. She risked her life for 8 or 11 trips back into the South to free folks. Yeah. And so people need to understand that I am not proof that there's no systemic reality. I am proof of the strength of human resilience and of faith and of a strong community in the face of it. But at the same time, I have a responsibility to, yes, enjoy some of my success, but to also call out these systemic realities. And I think the irony of those two is problematic for folks, because no one really wants to hear a successful middle-class black man with a doctorate degree lamenting racial disparities in America, much less in a very progressive community like Madison. But the truth of the matter is that's my work. And I think that Dr. Shirley saw that as a part of his work. And I wish that piece of it could have been played out as well. That yes, he was exceptional, but we understood that when he was in the South and people didn't know what he was doing or who he was not an exception. They treated him the way they would have treated anyone else.
And I think some of that was
anyone else who was black.
The focus of the film became the white character.
Yes.
It's his story. And even I was surprised that Mahershala Ali did win an Academy Award, but it was for supporting actor. And watching the film, I was like, how can this be supporting role? I mean, we start out with the Tony character, but he's a
support character.
Right, yeah. And I think that's telling of how it's viewed.
That's a powerful point. I didn't even think about that.
And what you just been talking about, I think that's something I've heard from you for a while. And even when I first met with you and with Jeremy, I think you were cautious about the sort of white ally effect of, you get involved for a while and then you feel like you accomplish something. And even one of our previous episodes, we talked about the U.S. Black History class that I'm going through. And I've heard the sort of sentiment of, what this is all good, but when do we know when we've got there? Right. What's the end game? Right. What are we going after? And that was really frustrating for me.
Sure.
And I think that that's a very common sentiment among white people, and certainly I'm not saying this is always the thought behind it, but it does sort of feel like when can we stop kind of feeling bad about this, this history, and when can we just get past that? I don't have to feel bad anymore.
Right. Right.
Because it wasn't me.
Right.
Yeah. In this history. Yeah.
By definition, Eli, an ally is someone who's empathetic with someone, and Black people live with this all the time. There was a line in the movie where the Don Shirley character said, "I live with this every day." Someone calls your name one time and you punch his lights out, and then that's a reflection on me because I'm the virtuoso being driven around the country. Right. I'm the one at risk because no one's going to know Tony the Lip or Tony Lip. No one's going to know who you are. So your reputation is never at risk because you don't have one. So throw a KFC cup out the car, right? Because you have nothing to lose. Right. But I do because they're going to say, "Whose car is this? Who are you?" And they're going to hold me responsible for what you're doing. But we feel that angst and that discomfort, and you articulated that so clearly, and I'm hoping people will hear that, and I think they will resonate with it. Like, yeah, that's how I feel. But I don't know Black people who just say, "I just feel good with life in America." So if we're going to be an ally, folks have got to understand you can't feel better than the person with whom you're sympathizing, because while you're asking when can we stop feeling better, we're asking when can we feel American. Yeah. When can we not have a repercussion of having elected a president that looks like me? And when can we feel comfortable knowing that a school district, a judicial system, a business system, chamber of commerce is going to do all it can to diversify folks and candidates? Why is it that when I talk about having candidates who look like me, the qualifier is, well, we just want the most qualified person, not thinking that, hey, just because you're white doesn't mean you're qualified in what you're doing. And so I think folks who would be white allies have got to understand the people with whom you're trying to resonate never get up and just think it's all over and it's all done. You learn to cope. And so that's why even in the history class, we call people would-be white allies. One of our funders said, when are you going to work with extreme folks who are, sort of the racist type? Because the people who come, they already know. And I said, what I found in Madison is that the people who think they know are the problem. Not because they're evil, but because they think because they feel good and don't see color, they're very, very helpful. He said, well, that's very ominous that you're just a would-be ally. I said, no, what's ominous is that you take one class or you watch Roots or you read The Bluest Eye and you think you're a Black ally and you go into a meeting room and you start speaking on behalf of Black people and make decisions that do not reflect us nor help us. That's what's frightening to me. And that's what happens in a community like Madison, that people become so white and woke that we don't even need Black people at the table, because I do Black. I speak Black. I know Black. I have a very good Black friend who explained something to me. That's the piece that we really want people to understand. Not one Black person can speak for a bunch of Black people, and certainly white people can't speak for Black folks. So, man, we've got some more work to do. I don't want to belabor the show, although this is very, very interesting. I would just say one last thing before we begin to wind this down. The only time Tony pulls out a gun is when two Black men are hiding behind the car. He didn't see them go out. He just shoots, a round up in the air. Says, "Don't ever bring your money out." He was taken to jail. He was being beaten by a small mob inside that bar. He didn't pull out the gun because he didn't know that the barkeeper was going to pull out the rifle. So he just sort of reached behind himself, and we were led to believe that he was faking. Jack, as we watched it, she said he's got a gun for real. But the only time he pulls out a gun is to protect the Black man from the Black people. Okay, so when you do assert this fully, because he was a bouncer, I thought he was really going to be beating up white folks throughout the whole movie. I'm not saying that's what I was looking forward to, but I thought he was going to be kicking some white tail for what they were doing. So the only time you bring your gun out is because Black folks saw you pull out a wad of money, because successful Blacks have got to be careful for unsuccessful Blacks, because you can get on the stage and play and they can listen to your music, but they gonna still try to take your money. That subtle message I thought was really, really dangerous. I think it says, see, there's prejudice even among Blacks. There's Black on Black crime, and white folks have been fighting white folks as long as there have been white folks on this planet, and it's never called white on white crime. It's just called, World War I, World War II, the Revolutionary War. It was called so many other things, but these are white people fighting against white people. And so that part really pissed me off. And I'll just say, I hope that Don Shirley's family continues to speak up. It doesn't sound to me like they're trying to get money or need money or anything. And it's so easy to say, for Nick to say, you know what, Don Shirley said, don't talk to any of my family. I mean, like Like, why wasn't that in writing?
Right.
You know, if he knew that this guy was seriously thinking about making a movie about his life, why not have something in writing so people would have some proof, which totally gives him poetic license to do and say stuff. But for a guy who clearly, I've Googled him, who clearly was in connection with folks like Nina Simone and Duke Ellington, the fact that he doesn't know who Aretha, Chubby Checker, or Little Richard, who they are on the radio, is absurd and crazy. So I guess I'm just saying that in just winding this down, I would encourage folks, if you've not watched it, watch it so that you can see this maybe with the perspective of this show, but juxtapose it with BlackKklansman and even watching Black Panther again. What I loved about Black Panther is that it did not have to put down the white community in order to lift the black population. And even when the character, I'm drawing a blank on his name, I've seen this movie 3 or 4 times. I can't think of the guy's name, but the only white guy in the movie who, when he was trying to sort of lead what they were going to do, and they just kept saying, "Hey, stand down. We've got this. We don't need you to do this. You know, stop putting your hand on this man's shoulder. He's our leader. You know, he's our crown leader. Don't be doing this." They were able just to show the strength of collective black brilliance and ingenuity. And even when there was just one character trying to lead the way, they basically said, "We've got this." And you know, Christy Clark Pajara, one of my friends, a professor at UW-Madison in the Afro-Am department, makes the point continually, black folks were not freed from slavery by white folks. Black people freed themselves. They fought against the Confederacy. They escaped to the North. They dug ditches and they prepared meals and they actually took up arms and they fought. So this whole sense that in order for black people to become whole, there's got to be a white savior is really, really crazy, because then black ingenuity and innovation is never really celebrated. And now more than ever, we need media to help to tell that story, not to just make it up, but to tell that story of black brilliance and innovation that has always worked. Because if we prove that it is only facilitated by whites, then it means we have trouble continuing to meet among ourselves to try to come up with solutions. I've got colleagues who will try to have meetings with black students to talk about how they navigate a predominantly white system. And there are white teachers and administrators who insist on being in the room. Well, I'll walk you to your room. Like, well, I know where it is. I do this every Tuesday. No, I'll walk you and then come into the room. And it's harder to ask someone out who's in a leadership role than in.
Right.
But the whole sense is we want to know what you're talking about, what you're doing. We need this sense of surveillance. And so I just want folks to watch BlackKklansman, If Beale Street Could Talk, Black Panther, and Green Book. If you're a would-be ally and this show is helping you to rethink things, watch it with some friends, with some colleagues, with your kids.
Yeah.
Talk through the issues. What part of these things do we still see? More importantly, what parts of this reality do we not see because it's called something else?
Yeah.
And here's a great way for you to utilize the strength of this discussion and the power of media and just allow yourself to transcend what you normally would see or think and try to look at these themes of white savior, watch it with a new eye, and let us know what you think is dangerous about that. And I would love for you to tweet out at us, make a comment on Facebook. Let us know how you're seeing these things, because when your perspective begins to change, your actions begin to change, and you begin to put yourself in harm's way. And I don't mean just physical harm. You put yourself in harm's way to defend those who are being wronged. And that's when a person inches closer to becoming an ally. But just reading a picture and you become nothing more than just Tony. Tony's not really an ally. He can't go from throwing away glasses to having a whole room full of Italian Americans who are glad that this black guy showed up. Tony has not had enough time to articulate his own translation into a more understanding and open-minded person. So by the end of the movie, after 8 weeks, this whole Italian gathering is glad to see this black man showing up and having dinner with them. I think you get to that place at a point, but there got to be way more battle scars and way more interactions than coaching on letter writing or throwing bones out a window. So listen, but more than just listening, I want the Black Like Me podcast family to act. So after Academy Awards take place, these movies either come out on rent on iTunes or other platforms, or they're cheaper in the theaters. I want to challenge you. It's very seldom that you see so many movies highlighted that are focusing on the themes of Black Americans. See them, think, take notes, post your questions, because if we get enough of them, I will even do another episode where I address some of those. But you got to tweet your questions and your observations out to us, or post them on Facebook. And as always, we'll put a link in this episode so that you can go to those more quickly. Another thing you can do is help your friends subscribe to Black Like Me. Let them be able to sit and learn through listening, and vicariously developing a different perspective on where we are in this world. I think we can do better. I think that we can have better, but I think we've got to tell the truth about what's kept us apart. Otherwise, it will keep us from coming together. So you just tuned into another amazing episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. I've had Eli in the studio with me talking about his perspective on Green Book. Listen to those other movies. Talk to us. We would love to use this podcast as a platform for continuing this dialogue. Thank you for all the folks across the country who are listening to us, folks around the world, UK, Vietnam, Namibia, Central America, Germany, Australia. You're warming my heart. But hey, folks in those faraway places, tweet out at me, talk to me, put notes up. We want to know why you're listening, how you found out, and how it's going for you. Make my day by reaching out to me. All right. Hey, thank you for being a part of this podcast, a part of this discussion, and a part of a group of people who want to make a difference by being a difference. All right. Thank you so much, and I'll come back and talk with you soon.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.